Most small businesses are using AI completely wrong and wasting a lot of time doing it. Everyone's chasing tools, prompts, automations, but they're skipping the part that actually matters. Today's guest helps small and mid-sized businesses actually implement AI inside their operations, not just play with it. And here's the reality: AI is not the solution, it's the last layer. If your data is messy, your workflows are broken. AI just makes the chaos faster. We break down where AI actually works, what's a complete waste of time, and how to implement it without breaking your business. If you're running a business right now, this is the conversation you need.
Jake Pena. I'm the founder and CEO of Black Door LLC, and we're basically an AI transformation partner. We help small and medium businesses adopt and implement AI into their ecosystem.
Okay. So implement AI in what fields or what parts of their business? Because there's a lot of hype right now around AI. All these companies are trying to raise as much capital as they can, as fast as they can. So there's definitely a ton of nonsense out there. So where do you see the smart entrepreneurs or business owners right now inserting AI into their workflow?
So I see a lot of companies using AI in their external workflows. So a lot of lead generation or market research to develop the lists that they will then use to reach out to them and try to capture leads and more revenue that way. I also see a lot of companies using AI internally to basically optimize their internal workflows, right? So, for example, I have a client that's in the healthcare industry, and he uses it to, process his soap notes and things like that to kind of, deal with some of his patient work.
Okay, so are we talking about agents that are within like a specific ecosystem, like Anthropic or OpenAI, or are we talking about OpenClaw, kind of like open source stuff?
Yeah, I think a lot of it really depends on the client. So there are tons of solutions, just like there was back in the day in the internet, right?
Yeah.
You pick your favorite website, and a lot of them do similar things. So I think it depends on what your needs are. So some clients have regulation and compliance items that they need to deal with, and so in that case, that it could be a different setup. But there's tools like Claude. Claude's a very whether it's Claude AI or Cowork or Code, they're all very powerful systems. That tends to be one of my favorites. OpenClaw is another big one. There's OpenClaw is very powerful, but it's also got a lot of risk because it's wide open. So from a security standpoint, there's a lot of risk there that you have to mitigate in order to implement that correctly. So
Okay.
there's tons of tools, and there's lots of overlap in terms of their features. So
so I want to go back to security for sure, because that's a part of like how do we implement it later. But in the front end, I want to talk about what can we do with this thing, and what's actually real and what's not. So you mentioned the external use case, which is going out and scraping or collecting data collection for generating leads, essentially, for the team. So are we talking give me an example of a business that does that right now, that you do that for right now?
So one of the clients in my pipeline is looking at how can they generate leads for when was this? This was for so real estate tends to be a big one, right?
Okay.
And so think of like a typical wholesale model where they're looking at how can I find houses in distress, distressed properties and things like that. So
okay, and the same can apply to a roofer, for example, who wants to look up all the homes that have changed roofs in the last 10 years or something, or have not replaced their roof in 30 years.
Yeah, all of your home services, roofers, window washers, power washers, plumbers, HVAC, all of it. Right?
So they need a way. So what so the agent goes out and looks up the information. isn't that similar to them just going and buying a list of these properties within a certain community?
Yeah, and it's the same thing that the people that are putting the list together are doing, right? So
Yeah.
you're kind of cutting out the middleman, right? Your agent becomes that middleman. So there's some setup that you would need to do on the front end, but once it's set up, it becomes automatic, and it's working while you're sleeping.
Okay.
So it
But
can reach
but
out.
I'm assuming there's kind of like some token use and there's
Of
some
course.
cost to it, and you got to figure out which one is cheaper. Um, and are the AIs going and augmenting this list through other providers, or like how are they finding the information? Because you obviously have to go and access like a database that you probably have to pay for to get that data anyway.
Yeah, it depends, right? So I think, for example, if you're a wholesaler, right, there's a lot of public data that you can
Okay.
access. That's generally free.
Yeah.
Um, if you're doing business to business, a lot of times you can sort of scrape, Google business profiles in a particular niche or area that you're in,
Okay.
and start pulling data like that. So, there are relatively inexpensive ways to gather the list. It really just depends on what your industry is and what you're after.
Okay.
Um,
And
but
so you're getting that list, and then are you automating it directly into a CRM? And then what is the next thing that you're automating?
yeah, so it really depends on what your workflow is, right?
Yeah.
So that's one important thing, is to understand what your workflow is, because if you don't, and applying AI to it's going to be, more
But the
challenging.
challenge with workflows, the challenge with that particular thing that I think a lot of consultants will have a problem with, is because there's a reason why certain workflows don't exist already, because the tooling didn't exist.
Right.
So now we have to reimagine the workflows in a way, because we didn't do the scraping every time because we didn't have the capability to have an automated scraping going on. So what we used to do, we go and buy a list from X provider, and then we send it to some other person on Upwork, on Fiverr, to augment it. And then we'll, and that doesn't happen continuously. It happens maybe once a year. And then we upload it into. So now you have to kind of reimagine the workflow because the
Mhm.
tools are available.
Yeah, and what's great is you can ask AI to,
Yes.
to help you define those workflows, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not sure where to look, you can ask AI to help you, find the source data, and then really it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to invest in if there's a fee for it or a cost to it, right? Versus just paying somebody else. And sometimes paying somebody else to grab the list might be
Cheaper.
the cheaper or
Yeah.
easier move, because they're doing it in bulk, and
Yeah.
they may be reselling the same data sets multiple times. So
Yeah.
um,
And then also like the accuracy of the data as well. So now if you create an automation like that, and then where, let's say someone has a CRM, let's say a HubSpot or a Salesforce, and then they want to be able to create some level of outreach, they want to be able to create some level of qualifying of those leads before they're sending them to their salespeople. What tools would you use? Would you use an OpenClaw for something like that, or Cloud Cowork can function in that role?
yeah, so generally up front, I mean, so now there's a lot of overlap between Claude, and even with like the newest, the managed agents. I've been tinkering with some of those lately too. There's some overlap in what OpenClaw can do and what Claude can do. And for businesses, usually if they have something that they're already using, I'll use an example. So Closely is a tool that helps automate LinkedIn connection requests and I believe posts as well. So you can use something that's an orchestrator or a harness like OpenClaw and connect it to your Closely account, and then it's doing some of the campaigns and things through its connection with LinkedIn. Or you could in theory set up a connection directly into LinkedIn from your OpenClaw, and have it uh, post things on your behalf
Wouldn't that get you banned from LinkedIn?
It could, right? So you're always up against terms of service, and
Yes.
there's different sort of
And it's
warm up
crazy
periods
because
and
these
things like that.
days,
So,
yeah, because these days they're constantly. I mean, I just got suspended from X because they thought I was a bot, and I'm not a bot. I'm a real person.
I'm not a bot, but my
And
agent is.
yeah, I'm not even. I don't even have an agent. I'm like literally myself
Yeah.
using the tool, and for some reason it thinks that I'm a bot, and it's just suspended me. And I kept, asking, sending messages to them, and they haven't done anything. So I think a lot of these platforms are pushing back, and they're gonna get more and more sensitive toward bots, and then their algorithms are not going to differentiate. They're not even differentiate between a real person and a bot. So, but using a bot makes you even more vulnerable to being banned from these platforms, which is I think a lot of the reasons why sometimes corporations and companies don't like to venture
Mhm.
in kind of automating things on platforms. So the use case of the scraping, collecting data, on the what else? What other use cases have you seen in terms of like the client acquisition and retention piece?
Yeah, so market research is another big one, right? So similar lines, right? So yeah, I've seen that. I think another one is like just advertising, right? Marketing and putting their business out there. So one of the things, actually, if you look at my Blackdoor website, that's all done by AI, right? So I've had agents helping me sort of iterate through my website,
Okay.
and it's great, right? So I basically just tell them what I want to do, and it puts it out there for me, and I've got it set up, so that there's some stop gates, but
Why don't
uh,
you share your screen? I want to see.
yeah,
And I want to
sure.
see what's your. So you're looking at it from a content creation perspective.
Right, content creation is a big one. I actually have, and I don't have it. It would take me a second to pull it up, but I've got a CRM that I built. I've got, because I manage infrastructure, I've got some monitoring, infrastructure monitoring that I do. Well, so what do you want to see? The website itself?
Yeah. You mentioned the website.
Yeah, hang on one second.
And this is like a WordPress site, or what kind of
No,
website?
it's pure HTML. So basically the code, if you want to nerd out a little bit, the code lives in GitHub,
Okay.
and I have a Vercel instance
So
that's
using
basically
Vercel.
connected to the GitHub. And so when
Yeah.
there's a change in GitHub, Vercel picks it up, and I have it set up. I have some stop gates, so
Have
that,
you seen the hack of Vercel this
yeah,
weekend?
I did see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I haven't taken a deep dive into it, but
Okay.
it happens, and that's why it's important to put put in stop gaps.
Yep.
Let's see. I think this is the right window. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So this is my website,
Okay.
and this was all developed by AI. Right. And so
Okay.
these are all like links to, like, so in this case, I have it tied to a Google Workspace
Google.
calendar.
Yeah.
Um,
And then so do you have like a blog in there that
Yeah,
creates content,
I
right?
literally
No?
was just working on this, so I just have a
Oh, you're just
first sort
starting.
of initial
Okay. Got
thing
it.
here, but um, and
Okay.
it helped me draft, the
Yeah.
blog. I approve everything, so it's not just doing whatever, but um, so it's
So the other thing and I'm gonna, you and I are friends, so I'm gonna push you a little bit on this.
yeah,
Um, and I have friends who do the same thing. They build sites but using Vercel or using Claude or Lovable or all these vibe coding tools.
mhm,
The challenge that I have is that they all look the same.
yeah,
And when you see a site that is built with, AI, you could tell it's a
yeah,
website that's built with AI. So, and then eventually Google and the Google crawlers are going to recognize that the contents in these websites is also AI. So you have kind of this double whammy. From an SEO side, I'm sure Google's going to throttle some of these websites because they're going to be building a lot of pages, and it'll be, it'll be cheaper to create content. And then on the other side, the user, just like the way, we can hear the AI accent when someone is, sending us things with, with the ChatGPT or Claude, we can see the AI design very quickly.
Right.
So how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, so I think for one, the models are getting a lot better.
Yeah.
So I think over time, it's going to get more difficult for humans anyway to discern what's human and what's not.
Well, it's been ChatGPT's been around for 3 years. It could tell. I could tell, when someone sends me something with copy paste, I can tell.
Have you played with assembly AI yet?
No.
So there's like language, or there's models. They're not even language. So there's basically speech to text models.
Okay.
And text to speech models that are specific for like for vocal, for voice.
Okay.
So
is it like 11 Labs to just
11 Labs is similar, but
no. When I meant accent, I mean like writing, like the style of writing. You can read the text and you can tell this is ChatGPT.
And a lot of that is on the user too, right? Because you can go in and give the language model instructions to like don't use M dashes, or one of the tricks that I've done with Claude is I've connected Claude to my inbox, to my Google inbox as a read only.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, go through my sent folder, right? Because up until recently, most of my sent stuff was actually me responding to other people. I said, go through my sent box and get an idea of like my cadence, my voice, right? Yeah. My typing voice, my text, my writing style, and basically create an MD file that is basically like how to emulate Jake. And it went through all of my holdings and says, okay, it gave me a description of how it thought I was, very to the point, and you don't, no BS, no small talk, It's like, yep, that's pretty accurate. And so now when I ask it to draft an email, it does so in my voice. And I always, like, for me, I always keep a human in the loop on certain things, especially anything that's money, banking, reputation, things like that, sort of high value things. I always keep a human in the loop, but it'll create the draft, and I'll basically, all I got to do is look at the draft and go, yep, send it. Yeah. And every now and then I'll have a correction that I want to make, but if it's something significant, I can just go tune the model and tell it to do something a little bit differently. But
yeah, that makes sense. So content creation. So we talk about scraping, content creation. I'm assuming building landing pages, building websites. What else?
I was going to show you another thing that I was tinkering on yesterday or the day before. So basically, I ran an SEO audit on my own on the website that AI created for me. I think I'm sharing that. So this is an SEO, and so I don't know if you're familiar with the term AEO, but it's answer engine optimization, which is basically how do you get your content into a large language model.
Yeah.
And so, I pointed it to my website and I said, okay, tell me what you see. And it told me what I was doing well. It told me some problems, right? And so I won't go through all of this, but it's a pretty in-depth, I mean, this is an 11-page report on what it liked and didn't like about my site. So I took this and I fed it back to Claude and said, hey, here's my SEO report, go fix my site.
Yeah.
So you just do a loop, right?
You did it in Claude, not in Vercel?
So the website is basically, I'll say the front end is like engined by, powered by Vercel, but Claude has access to the GitHub. So Claude will basically rewrite the code. It basically looked at this report, rewrote the code, put it in my GitHub, and then Vercel picked it back up. So,
interesting.
And then if I wanted to do it, I could just run this report again, because this report was done by a Claude managed agent that I created recently. And so, that Claude managed agent has the tools that it needs to do SEO, basically an analysis, right? An audit of my website. So,
Which tool did the analysis?
so I created a Claude managed agent, which is a relatively new thing from Anthropic. So basically you can create an agent kind of like OpenClaw, a little bit different. It's kind of serverless. It spins up in real time. And then basically it doesn't persist unless you need it to, but, and then you can give it skills and instructions and all the things that you can do kind of like with OpenClaw. And,
Okay.
yeah. And so basically I created this SEO audit tool, which is an agent, and I can point it to, if you want, I can actually pull up your website.
Yeah, I'm scared. I'll send you the website. Send it to me later.
Yeah, I'll send it to you later.
Yeah,
I've actually already done it because I was going to send it to you.
yeah.
Just for
Send
fun,
it to
but,
me. I wanna see it. I definitely need to connect directly because mine is WordPress, and I want to connect it directly to Claude and have it just, go do those things that you just said. Okay, so content creation. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, um, they they're challenged because they're, obviously they're doing what they're doing every day. They're managing the team. They're going through projects. They're going through. So this kind of like on the sales side or marketing side, it kind of creates another layer of things they have to do. And I'm assuming if they have a marketing person, that person can kind of help execute some of those elements. You mentioned operation. We talked about operation and workflows. And you mentioned a doctor getting notes into a system. What other workflows that have you seen, like on an operation side?
yeah. So another conversation I've had is on the insurance side, right? So if an insurance agent or broker is putting together a package for a client, right, they can pull together from their, because they have systems that they work in, and they can pull data from that system and basically compile their package, right, that they send off to the different providers. And now they don't have to manually hand jam all of that, right? So they can basically compile all of the data from, okay, here's my client, name, address, phone number, what it is their business does. Here's the kind of
so it's like a client file that they put together to send to the different insurance providers to get a quote, multiple quotes back. So
right. And conceptually, right, you can automate all of that. So based on sort of a client onboarding session and a discovery call, and pull all of that data together into a package, and then automatically send it out to like 2, 3, however many different providers you might be working with.
Yeah.
And then when the answers come back, here's the different packages. You could then use AI to compare and contrast, provide a report, give it to your client, and all of that can be automated. Right.
Yeah.
So it does, and you inject the human in the loop where you need to. And I always just recommend sort of a crawl, walk, run approach. Right. So as you sort of build trust over time, and you're sure that things are set up and not going haywire, and you can kind of ratchet things up to be more automated.
Yeah.
And
a lot of the stuff doesn't necessarily need AI. It could be, pure automation first.
Right. Exactly.
And then you can add an AI layer later. And sometimes you don't even need that part.
And it's usually a lot cheaper if you don't use the AI, because automation, you're not dealing with tokens. A lot of that's just code, coding, and a lot of people think cron jobs is a new thing, but cron jobs have been around for since the dawn of computers, basically. So
and it's cheaper and it's much more accurate too.
Right. Exactly.
It's less susceptible for hallucinations. And so that's ops. Anything on the accounting and finance side?
So business insights is another big one, right? So one of my clients is one of his big things is like customer acquisition cost, right? So what channels, is it Google, like Google ads? Is it Meta ads? What channels are producing the best results? for client acquisition. And
Is he looking at it? Is he looking at it at the CRM level, or is he connecting all the way through the accounting and finance?
Yeah, so in this particular case, it's basically cost to booked call
Okay,
is
got
the
it.
listing,
So it's
right?
just at the CRM level.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, for whatever reason, his picture isn't clear on where his ad spend is going, right? So if you're not sure, how much it cost me to get a client, and I'm not exactly sure where that client came from, was it a Google ad or was it a Meta ad? Those are things that are helpful to be able to budget one or the other. Google ads is
Yeah.
working, but Meta's
But
not.
it's
Okay,
but
great.
it's just tracking. This
Right.
not necessarily,
Yeah.
an AI
Yeah.
thing. Okay. So just
Right.
building a database to be able to track all the
Yeah. Or
Okay.
and potentially plugging it into, your different tools, right? So if a tool has an API, right,
Yeah.
that's great for the
Like a CRM, you mean?
an OpenClaw or something like that, right? Because what's nice is you can have OpenClaw pull in feeds from your CRM and your Google Analytics and your website, your Google search, and like all the different wherever all the data is, and basically create a picture of like what's going on. Right. So great business insights that help you, steer ad spend or,
What about just downloading everything into one large database, one single source
Mhm.
of truth, and then maybe giving the tool
Yeah,
access to that, a copy of that database to be able
exactly.
to give you insight.
Exactly.
And then probably if you have a database, you could probably have a BI tool without
Yep.
even OpenClaw to be able to see.
Yeah. A lot of the AI just helps with the automation piece and really enhancing the data or enriching the data, right? And helping you understand that data. So that's where the large language models are super helpful because they'll look at your data and give you like a nice report, right?
Yeah,
Now you got to you got to be careful that that it's accurate, not
that's
just
it. That's the
feeding you
part. Yes.
a line of BS. But
Yes, that's the part because sometimes it's missing something
yeah,
and it tries to fill the gap and it just, predicts what the next thing's what the real thing is gonna be. And that's why, like, to me, the farther away I can go, like, I want to use AI to like the last 5%, but
mm,
95% of it, I want it to be, you know, uh, uh, actual automation and actual database and accurate and so forth. And so that's the key. So that's the question. So how do you kind of eliminate, reduce, control the hallucination, the errors, the forgetting of instructions and so forth?
mhm.
How do you, and having to go back and create, having to avoid the slop debt that's going to be created moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part is you're going to create, it's basically metadata, right? Data about data,
Yeah.
and it's just going to grow exponentially in your own holdings. And so making heads or tails of that is going to be a huge challenge. So I think, the best way to mitigate that is to have a plan, right? You got to have a plan up front, and what is my system design, right? And so, do you have 30 people on your team and they're all using their own, individual AI tools, and one person's using chat and one's using Claude, and like, there's no central brain, right? Or central repository. Like that's a problem, right? Shadow AI is the term for that. People don't necessarily have policies. Like, what is your business policy? Is shadow AI allowed, or is that a fireable offense? Right? Would you even know about it? Like, there's, how would you even enforce that? But then, in terms of system design, having a centralized brain, if you will, or second brain, as they called, like something like Obsidian, or you've got these there's different types, right? Like relational databases, and or just a well-structured file system, right, with all your sort of markdown files and keeping track of everything. But if you have three different tools and they're not all pointed to the same thing, then you just have three different sets of chaos, right? So having a well, structured plan and executing to that plan is important. And I think, you know,
So
there's a lot of thought process that goes into that, right?
yeah, so let's say, you know, a typical, you know, 5 million revenue roofing company, and they don't have any. They have CRM. They have, like, let's say, an operating tool like Service Titan. They may have, you know, QuickBooks or some other finance, probably QuickBooks and some other tools. And I mean, every company has multiple tools for different things. How do they get started? You know, in well, number one, should they be using AI in anything outside of just writing stuff on ChatGPT or Claude? Should they be using AI? What should be their goal? And then would they get started?
Yeah, I think from a competitor's perspective, right? If you're not using it, your competitors are going to be using it. And I don't think the goal of, you know, eliminating humans is right. I think empowering humans using AI is probably the right answer. So, you know, if you can 10x the productivity of one human, then, you know, what does that do for a growing and scaling company?
Yeah.
I think that's the winning model. And so if you're not adopting AI and allowing your empowering your employees to do more, you know, more work or better work, or just being more efficient so that they're not miserable and hand jamming something, you know, for 8 hours a day, that's important, right? And so I think the short answer is yes. I think everybody should be adopting it. I think, you know, I think there's a lot of hype and like people rushing to adopt it. I think you can just get started now, right, and grow into it. And you can either learn how to DIY it as an owner, or you can pay somebody that can help you implement it. Um, you know, it's like, what's your budget? What's your pain tolerance? If you're not a technical person, there's a lot of technical things that, despite popular belief, are still involved. You can't just tell AI to magically go make it all work and it happens for you. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of you know, advantages that you can have, and every use case, you know, every business has a different use case, right? And there's no one size fits all. So, you know, what is your biggest pain point? Right? And that's every time I, you know, get on a call with a new client or prospective client, it's usually my first question is like, what is your biggest pain point? What thing do you hate doing so much that you just can't stand it anymore, and you need to solve that problem?
Yeah.
And that's usually, you know, that's usually how you prioritize. So, you know, there's companies that, you know, their cash flow, they're fine, right? They're fine from a cash flow perspective, but man, if they could just, you know, if they just didn't have to spend, you know, 4 hours a day doing something and they only had to spend 1 hour a day, oh, that would be so amazing. Because then I could free up those other hours to do something more interesting or more productive.
Yeah, a lot. So a lot of times, what I found is that a lot of these entrepreneurs, or the business owners, have their own kind of pain. But
Mhm,
obviously, the team has its own pain, right?
right.
And
And sometimes they're not aware of each other either, right? Like
correct.
the top and the bottom, like
Most of the time,
don't
you
always
know what I mean?
know.
Like 90% of the time, they're not. Yeah. And so when you meet the business owner wants more growth, more profitability, maybe visibility. Maybe they're not seeing the true cost of things or the true profitability of things, and they want to break down profitability per job or profitability per crew or this and that. And a lot of it is really just having all your data in one place, and creating that data, you know, infrastructure.
Mhm,
And that's kind of like where it starts. And then, you know, and then auditing those data channels to make sure that there are no leaks or there's no garbage coming in. So it keeps the data lake clean,
mhm,
and complete. And so I think that's where probably you want to start with all of them, and then maybe interview and give some visibility and toolings in terms of, like, you know, visual, you know, seeing the reporting, seeing data, seeing KPIs for the
mhm,
owner. But then you got to go interview the team and find out, okay, the admin girl, what does she spend most of her time? What are some of the things that could be probably automated with a form and the database, and what are some of the things that can be taken out of her so she can spend more time on the phone talking to customers or
right.
following up, or following up on jobs and things that actually can be more valuable to the business. Before you can go back to the kind of like the growth things, the sales and marketing and updating the website and
Right.
all the other things.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's always the internal versus external challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so, if your biggest pain point's internal, then you focus on the internal problem. If you're not getting enough leads or, something like that, then you focus on the external. So,
But yeah. And I think that's where like a lot of these, that's where sometimes you have the business owner on the one side, and then you have the AI implementer on the other side.
mhm,
And it's very similar to the old back in the day developer or MSP, managed IT provider, where the owner says, oh, this is my problem, and then can you solve it for me? And then the other person says, okay, well, what's your budget? Okay, here's the solution, or here's where it is. But they need that business analyst in between that's going to be, number one, get the confidence that the business owner, that he understands business first. You know what I mean? And get the
Right.
business owner to say, oh, I think you have a headache, but that's not your problem. Your problem is you have this bullet over here
mhm,
that's, you're bleeding.
right.
And I think so he wants, because if he calls the MSP and says I have a headache, they're going to give him an aspirin. They're not going to, they're not looking at the whole body. They're not
Diagnose
looking
the root cause. Yeah.
they're not looking at the bullet.
Yeah.
He's bleeding. So that's where kind of like, I think that's where I see the challenge, because we're talking about work. We're not talking about just IT solutions.
Yeah.
I mean, AI is not just an IT solution. AI is the actual worker.
Right.
And so we're talking about actual, workflows, and you can't take a workflow on its own. You have to look at it in the whole. Does this workflow need to exist to begin with,
Yep.
before we talk about automating it? You know
Right.
what I mean? Or optimizing it and so forth. So, and I think that's where it's going to be a fun next 5 years, because a lot of people are going to create a lot of stuff that they don't need.
Well, and it's funny. I had a conversation this morning actually with a client that was, they were telling me like, well, this is how we've always done it this way, and I'm like, okay, but this is how we're gonna here's how it's all gonna change
Yeah.
for the better, right? And
Yes.
so like just getting people comfortable with that change, and that actually wasn't even an AI problem, right? It was just it was a workflow problem. So you're exactly right. I think having somebody on your side that can help you just be another set of eyes and go, okay, like this workflow, we can probably improve the workflow just in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then optimize it with AI, right?
Yes.
But if you keep a broken model and then you try to like apply AI to it, it's still a broken model. It just breaks faster.
Yes.
So, so
you're speeding up a process that's not working.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's an interesting part, is you have the data piece for sure. And I mean, every business does need like cleaner data flows, like all of them. And I mean, I haven't seen a single business that
and
has.
That's how
this
every
thing
engagement
down.
always starts. It's like, you basically need to order the chaos, right? Because there's always chaos, and you've got data in every nook and cranny. And as you're doing a data, like I just got done doing a data migration, and as I finished, it was like, oh, and there's this other thing.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, I didn't know about that, so let's now gotta put that into the equation.
Yes.
But yeah, so ordering the chaos, I think is always the first step before you even really get to the technical piece, right? I always joke and say, the technical part is the easy part for me. It's all the other. It's the business processes or lack thereof, or the policies or lack thereof, that usually need the most tuning before you even start prescribing a technical solution.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of this is that everything is going to be bespoke. Yes, there are some solutions that can do 60-70% of things, but you still have to redesign the way these tools work with each other based on the way the business itself works. And you can see, you can find two roofing companies next door to each other, but they work completely different. They have different processes. Right. They operate differently, and it's okay. That's just how, they've been successful.
Mhm. Well,
And
and even structurally, they could be different, right? One's an employee-owned company and one's not. One's a public company.
yeah, and it could be
And so
one is
that
marketing
changes.
oriented. Yeah, one
Yeah,
is
that
marketing
changes
oriented, one's
everything.
is sales oriented, one's is, what I
Mhm.
mean? It could be literally the same size, same everything. And
Right.
then it's just that one runs, they want more project based and one wants more maintenance based. And then
Right.
one is like sales oriented and the other one is, marketing oriented. And,
Yeah.
one is like, has none of those, no marketing, no sales, just pure reputation,
Yeah. Word of
and
mouth.
and that's how they've been running.
Yeah.
And so what you're trying to do is augment what's existing,
Exactly.
and help facilitate that. So we talked about the database. We talked about like understanding the whole workflow. Now, what's the next step usually in the process?
Yes. So I think implementation is the right. So that's when things kind of get down to brass tacks, right?
Yeah,
So, even if you have the perfect plan, right? So you've gone through, you've done an audit, right? You've looked at your entire tech stack, all the different, where all your data lives, all the different vertical SaaSes. You might have 13, 14, 30 different SaaS,
yeah,
verticals that you're dealing with. Now you put together a plan that, consolidates where you can, maybe you're adding stuff here, you're trimming stuff there. But now you've got a game plan, right? You got a blueprint is what I call it, and a roadmap. And now you got to start bolting all those things together. And that's when it gets, that's when it gets interesting, right? Because now you got to have the chops, the coding chops, or whatever it is, to even if it's vibe coding, right? Even like, a lot of times, like I use Claude all the time. It's great because it writes a lot of the code for me. Now, when I look at the code, I can tell what it's doing. I can follow, like follow the bouncy ball, right? I can see what it's doing, and there's times where I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? Like that's not right. So you got to
yeah,
kind of know, you still got to know, have some expertise to monitor what's going on. I know, some people will just let it rip and, prompt inject everything and cross their fingers that it's that, that the AI knows what it's doing. I think that's a little crazy. But yeah, so stitching it all together, I think is the hard part, or not, I shouldn't say the hard part, is the next step, right? And that's where it gets more technical. And I say hard, I mean more complex, right?
yeah.
Um, and so
And
that's where, getting things to work uh, without spending a gajillion dollars in tokens to get it to work, because you're
yeah.
asking Claude every question that comes up. But
So
uh,
when you think back, you mentioned something. There are a lot of vertical software in each of these companies. Do you have an idea of, on average, how many vertical software a small business usually has
I mean,
going on at the
I
same time?
I've seen on average, I'd say probably a dozen
A
at
dozen.
least, right? I mean, you've got your CRM. So, one of my medical clients, like he's got an ERM, a CRM. You've got your different business insight tools, like, and then that's in addition to your business production platform. So like, your MS365 or your Google Workspace, whatever you're using.
Yeah.
Um, and that doesn't include, and then you got all the apps on top of that, right? So, you
The
might be,
apps inside of the
yeah, like
vehicles.
all your native apps, right? Like you might be using Power Automate or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah, it could add up.
wrapping your head around the entire
Yeah.
ecosystem of a business is always, it's always the fun part. It's trying to understand what they got going on,
Yeah,
and then figuring
and
out how
every one
to
of those systems
tune
have
that.
its own, is trying to bring its own AI tooling, and it's
Right.
trying to force, or push back against other tools
Yep.
that are coming in from the outside. And every one of those tools have its own kind of, nuance. And then you have to put them all together. You have to, like you said, stitch them all together. How do you decide, that blend between security and tools or structures like, open cloud or others? Like, what's the deciding factor? What's the logic there?
Yeah. So in general, and this is not a new concept, but in general, there's sort of the allow all model, which they call like the library model, where it's like wide open, right? So this is sort of similar as like internet models, where or network models, I should say, where everything is allowed, right? Nothing is blocked, everything's allowed, Wild West, right? They used to call that the library model. And then there's like the complete opposite, where it's like everything is what they call whitelisted. So only things that are allowed are allowed, right? Everything is blocked except for exceptions.
Yeah.
And so, depending on what industry you're in, you may, not care. Like you may be perfectly fine if everything's allowed and you only block the things that you care or like you don't want to see. But if you're in a regulated industry that has some compliance aspect to it, then you're probably going to go the other route, where you're only allowing, you're whitelisting everything. You're blocking everything and only allowing what you want. And so understanding what that is and starting there, and then as you go, okay, I need to do something, but it's not. I can't do it because fundamental permissions are not allowing this to be done. Not an MD file or something, but like the actual file permissions or role-based permissions don't allow it. Well, now you got to make a decision. Do I want to use it, or do I want it to be secure? Because 100% secure is 0% use, right? And 100% use is 0% secure. So you got to find the right blend. And there's security guidelines out there on how to approach that stuff. So
it's a great question. It's a philosophical question. Obviously I tend to be on the side of, lean toward making life easy for the team, and how can we serve the client faster?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm of that school. So I'll be probably more on the open side than the closed side. And I'm assuming most small businesses are kind of like that, where they don't want too many constraints on their employees, unless they're, like I usually see that people, once they get to that 15 million in revenue, and then they start working with clients that have certain, security, requirements and so forth, that's when they kind of change behavior. That's when they hire somebody and they start getting those license certifications and so forth. But and outside of healthcare, obviously healthcare and other, compliance, compliant industries. But in the sphere of like the 5 to 10 million, roofing or plumbing business or whatever, what's the kind of like the right mix, the right blend?
Yeah. So another thing I'll just add is, you may be a roofing company and not have a regulation or a compliance piece per se, but you may still have, PI, personally identifiable information, right? Your customers' names and addresses and phone numbers, right?
Absolutely.
So, you don't want to be that company that has a data breach and now all of your customers' info is out there because you decided to use a weak password or no password at all on something.
Yeah,
right?
but they all do, like T-Mobile, and like the U.S. government gets this data breach.
No doubt.
So I'm like,
I call that job security, but
yeah, I was just like, what are we talking about? Everybody's getting breached.
And that's the thing on the security side, right?
The actual security company gets its security breach. What was that? That was that Flare something, Cloudflare or something like. Yeah. So I'm like,
this is the best of them. That's to the point is like, if you don't have the systems in place to, do you even know that you got breached, right? At least they knew that they got breached, right? And how did they know that? Well, because they had monitoring set up, right? So there's different tools for like I could go on a whole thing for security, but I think to answer your question is there's best practices, right?
Yeah.
Use a password manager. Don't put a sticky note under your keyboard and hope that nobody sees it. Passkeys, two-factor authentication is wise, right?
So like basic security hygiene, things that you do for yourself, you should do for the company.
And really, like, do it for your clients.
Yeah.
Right? Do it for your clients. And because they, hopefully you're not storing payment card information in a spreadsheet somewhere. But if you are, at least password protect it.
Yeah,
Put it on an encrypted drive or something.
makes sense. That makes
So
sense.
yeah, I think just
So
finding the right balance.
yeah, exactly. Okay, that makes sense. So nothing too restrictive. But now, when you insert an AI tool, how
Mhm.
do you um, create security from that angle?
Yeah, so some similar concepts, right? So like for example, OpenClaw, you can give it what they call an allow list, right? And you can say, okay, only these commands are allowed, right? And this is down like under the hood, beyond just like a soul file or something like that, which is just a text file of instructions. It's not a hard coded rule per se. So things like that, right? And then you can also do sort of so another concept is least privilege, right? So um, maybe I've got more than one agent, and this agent doesn't need the same privileges. Agent A doesn't need the same privileges as agent Z,
Yeah,
right? And so like privileges are on for this guy, but not this guy, right? Well, because this one's internal facing and this one's external facing. So there's all these. Whenever you're talking about security, it's always about layers, right? And minimizing your blast radius. So if or when something happens, right, you don't lose the entire castle. You might have just lost the drawbridge, right?
makes
Um,
sense.
so, but yeah, so there's lots of technical things that you can do. So for OpenClaw, like one of the things that I do is I actually turn off any of the public facing IP addresses. So there's no public IP address that's only a local, and even that's set to a loopback. So lots of little tricks of the trade, so that the only way to actually get on the under the hood on that guy is through an SSH and like a mesh VPN and things like that. So
Okay,
it's
so
not even discoverable from the public, from the public internet. So,
makes sense.
but you can
Okay,
still get to it as a user. You can still get to it. There's just different ways to get there. So,
okay, that makes sense. So as we look forward to, I mean, we have stuff coming every week. There's new stuff. I mean, Entropic is announcing new stuff every week. So how does daily? Yeah. So how do business owners keep up
You
with
don't.
this stuff?
I
You
think the
don't.
answer is you don't, right?
Okay.
So, I think it's good to have a pulse on things, but I think if you try to chase every single thing down, you'll never get anything done.
Yeah.
You'll be in a constant change of flux. So, um, I think and this is something I struggle with as a technologist, right? That is just like a constant bombardment of all these great, cool things. And even some of the tools like you and I have talked about, it's like, man, I find myself spending a lot of time going, oh man, I need to get back to work.
Yes.
Chasing down, paperclip and all these other things, cool tools. But at the end of the day, I think it matters most what you're mapping to solve, like what you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
What you're trying to solve for. And, and even that, right? Not getting too wrapped around the axle on a solution. Like I even for myself, right? Like CRM, and there's like 30 different CRM tools. Which one do I pick? Do I build
Yeah.
my own? Do I buy one? Some hybrid model. So you can get wrapped around the axle on just one tool, let alone an entire system or system of systems.
Yeah.
So I think to answer your question, you don't, right? You kind of pick your favorite, stick with it, and then until like you find something that does it better or differently, if you're trying to solve a problem, you stick with what you got, right?
So what's a good way for a business owner to keep up, to learn?
There's some great sites. So I mean, obviously, social. If you follow any, there's tons of community. Like there's tons of open Claude communities and Claude communities.
They tend to be noisy. They tend to be a
Yeah,
lot of so what if
because
like
they're all AIs posting.
and they all and they all just figure it out themselves. They really
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, everybody just clips things from X or from other places, and then they just dump it on there. So it gets really noisy. So where do you actually get, good signal, not
Good
noise?
signal. Yeah, that's a great question, because there is a lot of noise, and I don't know that I have a great answer for you.
Okay.
I think there is a lot of noise, and that's part of the problem set is sifting through that. Um, it's tough for me, like I said, as a techie to hear all this noise and try to block it out too. I know it works for me. I've got like my stack of things that I, trust. And so whenever I'm working with a client, I can say, okay, for the most part, I can work with whatever you got. You got 365, you got Google Workspace. Cool. I can work with that. I may have a recommendation to migrate from one to the other. And then basically once we've kind of ordered some of your chaos, right, and done some of that, cleanup, and we start poking around, it's like, okay, I prefer X. It might be an OpenClaw, right? It might be a Claude, agent. It really depends on what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But as like I can recommend to my clients what I've found works for certain use cases. I always like to test things out on my own, eat my own dog food, as they say. And so, most of the things that I deliver to my clients are things that I've already built before.
Mm.
And so I have a pretty, detailed understanding of what's going on. Which, doesn't mean I can get to every single tool, but a lot of the tools are pretty similar under the hood. Some things are more exposed than others, but I think, finding something that works for you and kind of sticking with it until you have some good reason to change, right?
So the advice would be to get started, start small, build your database, do what you need to do anyway, clean up your data channels, clean up all the, get your arms around your infrastructure,
Right.
know how many tools you got and how many databases you have and so forth. Put it all in one place and then get some insights, from the data. It doesn't have to be AI. It could be just pure automation.
Yeah.
And then
I would call that a self audit, right? So just a full stack tech, self audit, and not even just tech, right? Like you audit your processes and your workflows.
Yeah. That gets like more. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It gets even more. But just to begin with, just the data, just find out where the data is, and then you put it all in one place,
right?
And then get some insight in terms of few KPIs, and then through that you'll see where the data leaks are, and then close those, clean that up, and then do some data plumbing, if you will, like some plumbing, clean up, and then after that process, like you were saying, go into the process phase and the workflows, and then find things that could be automated without AI,
right?
And then layer AI
right
at the end.
AI should be like the cherry on top.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And that's what I keep telling people. It's just like, should not be it's a great, AI is a great to get this conversation started.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
to get the people to talk to you and engage you in a like an audit or a conversation. But then, but the AI is not the goal. The AI is a tool, and it's best used after you've done everything else.
Right.
All the, used all the automation, all the tooling, maximize the tools you already have. Sometimes these tools already have robust automations in them. And then, at the end, whatever the gap, whatever's, whatever is the last 5% that we can't get with automation, then we can use AI for.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and as I always say, it's just zeros and ones. So like, how hard could it be?
Yes. Well, on that note, I appreciate it, Jake. Thank you for joining us.
All right, Jay.
I would love to do. We have to do this again, as next month when the whole world changes again.
Yeah, exactly.
It
never
stuff changes so quickly. Yeah. Cool, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.